Mid-morning or so, I called or texted my daughter, and she lives in Ames, and I didn't hear back from her. It was on a completely separate issue, and probably 30 minutes after I contacted her, she called me back, and she said, "Sorry, I didn't call earlier. I was in the basement. We had a tornado warning," and I was shocked. "You had a what?" And she said, "Yeah, the storm was really bad. I was in my apartment, and the tornado sirens went off, and I looked outside, and it was sunny, and it was clear, and thought, this is weird. Maybe they're doing a test." And she said, obviously 3-4 minutes later, it was dark, it was ominous. And so she went down in the basement of her apartment complex, and that was not the first indication that we were going to have storms that day. I had seen the weather and said we had a chance for severe storms around midday or so.
I'd actually gone for a jog, and I was running up 2nd Avenue. I hadn't actually looked at the weather that morning, and I heard the outdoor weather warning sirens blowing. And I looked off to the west and saw a pretty large, dark, black cloud.
Similar experiences, the sirens went off and it was sunny out. And so thought, well, this is odd. I know the storm's coming, but certainly you can see the ominous clouds on most thunderstorms when the sirens start going off. And sure enough, a few minutes later, winds picked up, and quickly could see how strong the winds were. But as typical Iowa thunderstorms are, I thought, okay, we're going to have 30 seconds, a minute, or maybe 3-4 minutes of high-level sustained winds as the front kind of moves through, and then it's going to be your typical thunderstorm pattern. And the winds weren't dying down. And
I got on the radio and said, hey, let's go ahead and just send 1 unit to everything at this point, because it was clear, even 90 seconds in, that it was going to be a pretty big storm. A lot of times during storms, the easiest thing to do is for a chief to just have an open phone line with the fire dispatcher. And pretty immediately the phone system at CRPD went down.
And just prior to that, with the level of damage, the number of calls that were going on, we needed to call some extra people in. It's an emergency situation, just call the closest people to Central Fire and or the people that live closest to the city, and just get them in here.
Drove over to CRPD, I don't know, 10 or 12 minutes into the event, and by then there was heavy storm damage throughout the city. When I got to CRPD, you couldn't drive down First Street. It was already blocked by trees and debris. And I was able to kind of drive through a few alleys and backyards and between a couple buildings.
Captain Hembrough with Cedar Rapids Police Department texted me, and we decided to activate the city's incident management team. I think that was 20 or 25 minutes into the incident, which is a team made up of several or all of the departments within the city, and it's part of the national response framework to do within the incident command system. So we had Public Works and PD and IT and finance and personnel here for documentation, and so we set up that team here in the city's incident command post here at Central Fire Station.
At that point, we only had a couple of radio channels because of the way the system was working. So I got on the radio and I talked to Chief Smith, and I said, we're going to need a USAR deployment in town. It was a signal to him to know that this was an event unlike your standard Iowa thunderstorm, where you have maybe 40 or 50 line down calls, that there were starting to be building collapses, there were trees down. This was unlike something we had done before.
Officially 126 miles somewhere in the Cedar Rapids area. Estimates were as high as 140 miles per hour with the winds. It really was equivalent to a Category 3, Category 4 hurricane.
Once I got to CRPD, there used to be a tree that was in the corner of the parking lot, and as I pulled Tahoe in there and was getting ready to exit the vehicle, the tree fell down on the Tahoe, and kind of that's where I was going to be for a while, because I certainly wasn't going to be able to drive anywhere. And when I got into dispatch, there were somewhere, I think, between 200 and 250 pending calls that had come in the first half hour. And that alone was shocking. We typically don't have any pending calls. And a pending call just means that we know that there's an emergency and we just haven't sent a unit to it. Sometimes calls will pend for maybe a minute or two, but the idea that we had calls pending for 5 or 10 minutes in a regular day is just unheard of. And at that point, we had some calls that were pending for 25, 30 minutes already. But that day, the 911 phone never stopped ringing. We had building collapses, we had cars pinned by trees, and it was just a matter of sending the resources to the calls where I thought that we could have the most impact. The thing about disasters is that people really step up, and it gives people an opportunity to do things that they may not be able to do on a daily basis. But we had people do just remarkable things and make remarkable decisions that made the lives of the people that live here better. It protected the people that work here, and it was just truly an amazing piece of emergency response.
Once we hit recovery mode, we kept the incident management team here, or the incident command post, activated for, I think it was exactly 2 weeks post-storm. From a city perspective, would be when there were less than 1,000 people without power within the city. And I think that 2 weeks following the storm, I think we were down to 300 or 400 people without power. So that's when we entered the recovery phase. Once we enter recovery mode, it becomes very, very high public works focused event, and it certainly has been a public works focused event but since day one, really, because they were out immediately using the snowplow routes to start to clear roadways for emergency access.
So we had a lot of trees, buildings, and infrastructure that had obviously never been exposed to that level of intensity before. Nearly every building in the city had damage.
Proud of the Cedar Rapids Fire Department, proud of all the workers within the city of Cedar Rapids. There were a lot of people that were working day in and day out that had damage to their own residences. They also had to, do everything that everybody in the community was doing, and they were working diligently all day and then going home and having to deal with that, not to mention the responses that we had to where we were responding all day and then having to go home to homes without power, trying to sleep in the sweltering heat and then come back and put in another 10, 12, or in our case 24-hour shift. And so I'm just proud of the response that we had, and quite honestly proud of the community. I've heard a lot of people state that in their neighborhoods, in their areas, as we had crews responding, that as soon as the winds were died down and the rain stopped and the sun was out, throughout the city, what did we hear? Chainsaws running. People got out, they helped themselves, they helped their neighbors, they checked on their neighbors, and that's just a testament to the Midwest work ethic and the Midwest resilience.
I'm proud to work for the Cedar Rapids Fire Department, and I've always felt that way. This is a special organization full of pretty amazing people. To the people that work for the fire department, to the people that work for the city of Cedar Rapids, hold your head high. You acquitted yourself well. I'm proud to work here, and I was proud to participate in that work.
And so I'll just say that we'll come through this disaster stronger. We'll take the lessons learned and we'll apply them for what, hopefully not this scale of a disaster, but we'll apply them to future events that we have.